There seems to be an agenda at work within these buildings, whether it's dictated by ownership or other people within the organization. They build a little tiny box because they don't want their own agenda or their own kingdom altered at all. And then they place these people in it, whether it's a GM, let's just say in New York for the Giants. They have a lot of people in play there.
Appreciate you tuning in to Birds 365 with John McMullen and Jody McDonald. We are lucky to have our next guest join us, former executive in the league, GM for both the Dolphins and the Saints. His podcast, Life in the Front Office, is a must listen to for all you NFL fans. Randy Mueller joins us here on Birds 365. How are you, Randy?
I'm doing great, guys. Good morning. I always get a little nervous when Jody starts talking about stiffs and then he introduces me a couple minutes later. So I hope there's no correlation there, but I'll do my best.
No correlation. Poor Mitch Trubisky got the difference today. Randy, my first question, how much media have you done this week and how many times have you talked about the Super Bowl, actually?
Yeah, that's a great point. Seems like this is the week off, so there's not much Super Bowl but as we all know, there's a lot of stuff going on in the league, and some of it's has to be addressed. I'll say that. So that seems to be taking the first position in everybody's line of questioning. That's for sure.
Well, you obviously you did a good piece on MuellerFootball.com. I was really interested in because you've hired and been in that process, head coaches over the years. You talked about building relationships. Has the NFL set up teams for failure when it comes to the Rooney Rule? In essence, you have to, people have called it checking the box. Right. And bottom line is the legislation forces you to interview candidates, and maybe you've already decided on a candidate that you wanted. So while I think it's altruistic, is it good policy, the Rooney Rule?
I think it served its purpose. I think it's a little old and played, to be honest with you. I've been at a lot of meetings, guys, before, and in committee meetings and at fancy resorts with owners where they decide to bring in X amount of potential coaches that are assistants around the league and get to know them and this and that. I just never have found the dialogue to mean much. I found it to be very surfacey. I found it to be really not relationship building in the comfort level that, say, you or I would build a relationship. So I just think it's tired, it's played. Now, that's not to say that owners are going to hire whoever they want. I'll give them, it's their ball, right? We're just all pawns in the game. But I'll say this, the GMs hold some responsibility as well. And I was happy to see a couple minority GMs get jobs this year. I think there's progress being made there. And some of that is because of the Rooney Rule. But I also think that we can dive deeper into the relationship part. And that's what I wrote at my blog site was, I just think it is about relationships. And I think we've got to build and bond those relationships at a lower level than at a fancy resort with owners, whether you're wearing fancy sandals or coat and tie, it doesn't really matter. I just think you've got to find ways to do this. And I used this as an example. If you got 10 seconds, let me just run through this. This was my example of it. Chris Broussard and Rob Parker are two hosts on Fox Sports Radio. I didn't know either one at all. And I've done a piece with them every week for the last 6 or 8 months. Every week I go on their show. We built a relationship where that I'm very trustworthy of these guys. I think they like me. I think we get along great. Come from all different angles, total different perspectives on life. But we've learned about each other through this business relationship to where it's almost like we've worked together now. And present company excluded, if I was going to hire a radio host, I would talk to these guys and consider doing that. That's how good I feel about them. Well, this can be carried over into football, I think, as well. We just haven't done a good enough job of kindling those relationships and starting them at a lower level and then just see where it goes. Because like I said in the piece, I think those who hire coaches sometimes have an idea who they want to hire even before the process starts. And I think that allows you to build these relationships, and communicating's hard. Building relationships is hard, as we all know in our own homes every day. whether it's on the street or inside our house with kids or whatever. Communicating's hard. But when you do it over a period of time, you find a comfort level with the people you're communicating with. And I just found that as an example of what I think we don't do a good enough job in the NFL is we need to work on building relationships at a lower level. And let's just say the owners don't know these, candidates. It's up to the GMs to know it and sell it above them. They've got to know who the candidates are. They've got to have relationships with all kinds of candidates, all colors of candidates, and get to know them really well. And then it's up to the GMs to take some responsibility in this too and sell that, if you believe in that, to the ownership or people above you within your own building. Sorry to be long-winded, but
No,
I have a little passion with this, and I hope we change enough of it to where we can actually, sit here 4 or 5 years from now and say, wow, we've come a ways.
Randy, let me try and even tie the structure together a little bit more. You made a great point about how key relationships are in all these hirings and decisions that are made. I'm on record as saying, and my father's an ex-professional general manager in Major League Baseball, but not in football. But the structure and the belief and the building of teams is very similar. And my father always believed that the most important relationship in the team is the general manager and the coach. That if they're on the same page and they're working hand in hand, that you've got your best chance for success. And my father was given a lot of latitude in hiring the managers when he was a general manager. I don't think that's as much in place in the NFL, that the owners are much more involved in the hiring of the coaches. You were the GM for a couple teams, you worked for a couple other teams. What is the best structure for getting it right across the board? The general manager, the coach, how much involvement is the owner? Should the owner just hire the general manager and then let the general manager pick the coach? Should the owner hire the coach for it and let him pick the general manager? Because John and I were talking earlier about the situation in Jacksonville, where the coach hiree wanted to dictate who the general manager should be, which to me is kind of a little back-ass word, but that's just me. What is the best way to line up the ducks to get it right within an NFL organization?
Well, here's the way I look at it, and I've told this story many times. I've worked under a coach, I've worked at level with a coach, and I've been the coach's boss. The relationship was always the same. We did things together no matter what. I never forced it if I was the boss. I never forced it if I was pushing an agenda underneath him. I think if you can't agree at that point, you go in a different lane. So I don't know that the structure is paramount in that. I think it's more important on how they work together. And I think what we've seen in a lot of NFL buildings now is there seems to be an agenda at work within these buildings, whether it's dictated by ownership or other people within the organization. They build a little tiny box because they don't want their own agenda or their own kingdom altered at all. And then they place these people in it, whether it's a GM, let's just say in New York for the Giants, they have a lot of people in play there. They build a little box for the GM. They interchange coaches, and I think coaches have really been devalued because of all these things the last few years, because they're plugging them in more like baseball has become, where they just plug the manager in and he dictates or the lineup cards are dictated to him. So there's a lot of that involved, but I just think there are a lot of agendas at work in these NFL buildings, and that's what's caused some of the pain and some, personality greats, but everybody's protecting their own turf. And that's not the way the NFL used to be. You would hire a GM and he's going to work with, obviously the owner has final say, but you're going to work with all the people in the building to make sure we hire the right person to lead our football team as a coach. But I just think we've gotten away from that because we're trying to do too many things and please too many masters within these NFL buildings.
That's interesting, Randy, because I hadn't thought of it in a similar way to baseball and coaches being devalued. Because there seems to be a bit of it, and I know you and I are probably agreeing on the groupthink and the philosophy and the same list, and everybody works off the same list, and then occasionally you'll get a curveball. That's been going on for years, but now we have this sort of template, and I don't want to disparage. But you look at the Sean McVay tree, and it's like, okay, Sean's successful, 2 Super Bowls, and he'll get an opportunity to win his first next weekend. But when it comes to devaluing of coaches, and is it become more of a status where you are dictating to them what you want? Because we went through Doug Peterson. I'm happy Doug got the job in Jacksonville. 3 years off a Super Bowl title. He was fired here in Philadelphia. He's got a lot of cachet, or he should, but he
Right.
didn't seem to have a lot of cachet around this league.
Right.
Where's that disconnect?
Well, I think it streams back to who has the owner's ears within a building per se. I think there's a lot of people in the owner's ears. There's a lot of people telling them how important they are and how we don't need this or don't need that because we have that covered. And so we're just going to hire a coach to roll out game plans every week. It's similar with GMs as well. I find very seldom does the most qualified guy get the GM job anymore in the NFL. It's really who fits within the agendas of the people in the building. And that's a, I'm not sure that's good for ball. It's good for the people that are involved, that's for sure. But I'm not sure it's good for football, for the game going forward. So, yeah, I think everybody has a say in their little part of running an organization, as they should. But it seems like they have more say than, say, a traditional GM used to have or a traditional coach used to have. So it's almost like everybody's been devalued for the sake of working together, which I've always done. And I think everybody that have had a GM job in the 80s or 90s or even early 2000s, everybody worked together. That wasn't it. It might be as much about personality as anything else. Like you say, cachet, a little, they don't want too much of a leader, too much of a personality. We found that out a little bit with Brian Flores in Miami. They didn't want too much, they wanted a coach. So we'll see. I don't know. It's a tough dynamic to measure because every franchise is different, and every franchise needs a different type of coach, which obviously feeds off a different type of a GM as well.
Randy, following up what John asked you about and the point that you made about devaluating coaches. John and I have mentioned on the show many times that the preferable thing to do with a coaching position is, if you get a guy who's good, try and hold on to him. Continuity is always better than constant change. So we would like to see that happen. If you're a fan of a team, that's what you want to see happen. I want to ask you about a specific team that you know because you worked for him, but before the guy who just was a longtime coach decided to step away. Sean Payton decided he had had enough in New Orleans, and he's going to take a year off, maybe do some announcing. Hadn't said he'll never coach again, but he did pass on being the Saints coach, even though he had time left to go on his contract this year. How difficult position are the Saints in right now? That they have to replace a guy like that. That if you don't have to get constant turnover in the coaching position, then you get a guy that's good enough to stick around for a decade and a half, and then you get kind of thrown into the fray and not know that it was coming. How difficult is it going to be for the Saints, because they're now down to one of just 3 teams without a coach? Are they in a tough spot this offseason?
Well, it's definitely a tough spot for them because they've got some other issues to deal with too. Obviously, they're trying to find a quarterback. Their cap has been somewhat of a mess. So they've got 2 or 3 pushback areas with regard to running their total organization. I think in their case, and everybody's really, they have built a criteria. I know Mickey, I know their front office. I probably am tied to there as anybody. They all know their criteria of what they want. They have assessed where they're at without Sean. Now they set a criteria as to what we want going forward. And I think that's why you see some of the names that they do. I don't think they need to start a total new program and change everything. And I think they feel pretty good about their roster for the most part. Obviously, they'd like to have more depth, but I think that's why you see the Dennis Allens, the guys who have been tied to there in the past, that they don't think they need a ton of change. So there's a fine line there between carrying on what Sean has done there and the culture, but yet freshening it enough to where they can still bring in new ideas. So I think that's their dilemma right now, is that they're caught between a rock and a hard spot, in that we all deal with curveballs, not necessarily of our coach walking out the door, but we all have to deal with curveballs at an NFL level, especially. So I'm happy they have a guy like Mickey Loomis, who's seen a lot, who's been through a lot, who won't make a knee-jerk reaction and kind of has a view of from 30,000 feet as to what his team is. And I think that's a lot of these jobs get filled around the league. I think in the criteria that the group sets isn't exactly accurate, or almost like they need some independent eyes to help them set the criteria. Some teams think they're better than others. Some teams thinks they're, and therefore they hire, think everything's great. You mentioned Jacksonville. They think they can just plug another coach in, whether it's Doug or whoever, and be fine. Well, I think they probably need a few more things to be changed than that. But sometimes self-assessment is the hardest part of it. But I do think the Saints will get a good coach. I don't think they will fare far from the tree. They'll bring in, I think, somebody who has some tie to either having been with Sean or that system before they make a decision.
You mentioned an independent eye, Randy. And this might be a difficult question to answer, but we are where we are in this cycle, and Doug's the latest hire, and we're talking about the Rooney Rule because of Brian Flores. There's only a few teams left. Houston has sort of made Brian a finalist, along with Jonathan Gannon and Josh McCown, two Eagles tinted candidates there. All of a sudden, New Orleans, Eric Bieniemy's on the list. Miami, Mike McDaniel seems to be the leader in the clubhouse. We'll see how that shakes out. Is there any push from the league to say, the Saints, to use the Saints, you have a good relationship with Mickey, say, hey, do us a solid, take a look at Eric Bieniemy? Is there any push like that going on from this league, do you think?
I don't know. That's a hard one. I'd say this, John. Over my time in the league, I was never really pushed, never really suggested to me what kind of a decision or what kind of action to take from the league. I never heard of it. But, I mean, it could be, it would be all speculation on my part. I would think the right thing to do, forgetting the racial part of it, is that you're going to interview anybody you think's qualified. And I think Mickey has to do that. I think he's done that a little bit already. So I don't know that you would need a push from the league. I'm sure the league, hey, present climate, in the mix, would love to see minorities get more time in front of, any interviews, but, time will tell. I just think the Saints are going to have to do what's right for them at the end of the day. And if it happens to be that it is a minority that gets the job, that's because they will have thought that that's the best route to go.
Randy, do want to ask you about something else that's going on in the National Football League, not hiring of new coaches. This is the Senior Bowl week, and a lot of people from the National Football League are down in Mobile, Alabama. You had a bunch of different positions leading up to becoming a general manager. You filled a lot of roles, wearing a lot of shoes. What is the thing that you can achieve in Senior Bowl week that gives you an edge over everybody else? Everyone's there. Everybody's asking questions. Everybody's scouting. Is there something that you did, you noticed over time? You said, I've got to track that going forward because it's telltale. Was there anything that you ever picked up out of all your Senior Bowl experience? You said, yeah, here's a key aspect that we need to continue to monitor year after year.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, to be honest with you. And I'll try to stay as positive as I can because I'm all for what they're doing in Mobile. And I would say this, year after year after year, I would go down there with our staff and we would come back, and especially, and I'm talking about coaching staff, and our coaches would come back and a lot of times they would have reasons to not like certain players. We're there to evaluate. But here's the thing you got to remember. Most of these players haven't done much since Thanksgiving, right? They've been sitting around for 6 weeks. So I always took this into account. Let's just say it's an offensive line coach that's down there and he's seeing a guy play guard for the first time ever, and he has done nothing for 6 weeks. How do you think he's going to look, Jody? Not very good. Yeah. The drills are all set up for the defense to win anyway in pass rush and all the other stuff. So when you go down there, you just got to be a little careful. So I kind of surmised after many years was, should I even have the offensive line coach there? Do I want his first impression of a player to be this? Because we get anchored on our position, right? A lot of times you try not to, but so the offensive line coach goes and he comes back and he's ripping apart these guys. Well, Let's go look at some film. The one thing, so from that, I said, okay, we're going to keep doing this. Let's make sure our coaches have seen some real film before we go down there. Make sure they see some school visit film that our scouts saw. So we're starting from an impression of, hey, I've seen already 3 or 4 games of this guy, so I know what he's been asked to do in his college. That's one. A little bit of a negative sense that you got to be aware of. The other one, what really became a lot, and we did this tons when I was in Miami with Nick Saban, we really spent more time interviewing players. It was a great chance for us to get to know them personally. If you weren't coaching the game, we set up, and everybody does this now, but back in the day, we didn't do a ton of this. I really didn't do a lot of it until I got with Nick. And we would set up sometimes multiple interview rooms to make sure we had them all covered, because it's quality time you got to spend with these players off the field to get to know them. And so I think those are big things that go a long ways toward evaluating now, is just more interview time, more face-to-face time, more teaching, learning. How does this guy learn best? Does he learn? A lot of ways that you can get to know these players in that setting without even being out at practice. So some of that stuff as well are things that I think they're a little bit, they evolve from year to year, but after you've been there a few years, those were big things for me, the interviews, and really how to control the impressions that our coaches get, and make sure they understand the background before they start making up, a case for this guy or that guy.
Now, Randy, that's interesting, because you as a GM in this league, and any GM or anybody with that sort of job description, has to gather that information from all these different coaches, personnel, scouts. You mentioned the coaching, the relationship there, and that collaboration has become the buzzword in the NFL. But somebody's got to make the decision when it comes down to it. Somebody's got to be in charge. How does that work when you have all these pieces working together, trying to get you or the head coach the proper information? You guys pound the table for certain players. They probably get disappointed if you go in a different direction. Is that the most difficult part of being the GM, keeping everybody on the same page in this league?
I think it is. I also think it's the best part about it, John, to be honest with you. It's the part I miss the most of not being with the team. I love the process. I love just the stuff that you described, getting everybody's input, putting it all together. Just pretend we start with a big, huge blank worksheet and it's empty. There's not a writing on it. But by the end of the spring, it's completely full and you can't see the white paper. So that's really what it is. And it is a process. And the Senior Bowl is just a small sliver of it. One thing we get influenced by as fans is that there's a lot of people there now, and there's a lot of non-working NFL people there. And so they give impressions of this or that. They control a little bit of social media. They influence the fans that are out there. And yet I always sometimes shake my head as, well, I didn't really see it like that. And what fans got to realize is there may be 10 of these inlets or outlets giving their opinions when you're inside an NFL building. So you've got to control and build them all together to come up with our place where we place a particular player. And these influencers now, they do a lot to really affect the impression of that fans have about players. And then we have to live with it as NFL people. So I would tune out a lot of the noise per se, and the people outside of our building really during that whole process. But you're right, it is a complicated process that starts with, the school visits all fall, and those really matter. So you're gathering that from your scouts, then the Senior Bowl, then the combine, then the workouts, the individual school workouts before you even get to put it all together. And by the way, I kind of want to know as much of this as I can before we even sit down to have free agent meetings. So figure that part into it and add free agency in there as well. So it's a Rubik's Cube, but like I said, that's what kept me going. I love the process of building a consensus on not only players, but of your plan in the offseason.
All right, Randy, 2-part question here. Part one, and we'll see if we can just agree on it to an extent. Would you say to an extent the NFL is a copycat league?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of times. Yeah.
Good. All right. Then my question is about the Los Angeles Rams. If they should lose this week to the Cincinnati Bengals, will they be viewed as the team that made 2 of the last 4 Super Bowls and did so by pushing all their chips into the middle of the table and saying, draft picks, who needs draft picks? Give us established players. Or will they be looked at the team who pushed all their chips into the table, and the final pot, they got beat again, did by the Patriots 3 years ago, get beat by the Bengals again here. Will teams be more likely to try and follow the Rams' game plan in building a roster, putting together a team? If the Rams win the game, will they be less likely if they lose the game? Will this one outcome of this game change how copycat the Rams are looked at?
Well, I think it's a hard question, Jody. I only hesitate because I'm not sure how the rest of the league will look at it. I look at it like this. I think what they've done is they've made their team better, and I don't think it's all about this year. If you offered me, to swap Jared Goff for Matthew Stafford, I'm doing that 10 out of 10 times, and I'm not worried about just doing it for this year. They've added players. Now, they've added some players with lesser contracts, so that someone's going to have to pay the price for some of the decisions they've made. But I don't necessarily think it's all about this year. I think it's about what they've built. They have acquired some later round picks once they've given away first round picks, and they've done a pretty good job of hitting on those mid to late round picks as well. I like the idea of being aggressive. I wish half the teams would consider some of this stuff, but having been around as long as I have, I know teams that wouldn't even answer the phone for this stuff. So they're just not interested in it. They think, they have enough players. I think that's the biggest misnomer in the NFL, is that everybody's trying to be in the middle of every deal and be aggressive. They're not. Some of these teams are very happy with their roster, and that's why I say the independent eye. Some of them I wish they could use a little independent eye to self-assess where they're at. So I don't think this is a case for one and done. I think if the Rams do lose this game, more power to them. They're going to find a way to retool. I think every year's become a retool in the NFL. I don't think a long-range plan is any longer than 2 years, to be honest with you. So you guys have seen that in Philly, how they've moved pieces and people around. And I commend Howie for it. I know he's one of the guys that is in the middle of every deal and trying to be as aggressive as he can to help his team. And he has one eye on the future. I get it. But I like what the Rams have done. I'll be the first to admit that when they did it, I kind of set my pause button a little bit, but then when you really analyze it, they're a better team now than they've been in a long time. So I think they'd do it again, even if they lose this game.
Last one from me, Randy, and everybody should read Randy at MuellerFootball.com. Great GM podcast on the Athletic, best in the business as far as I'm concerned. Former NFL Executive of the Year. Randy, I want to piggyback off that Rams sentiment because I agree with you. I keep hearing people talk about, we need this guy for the next 10 years. Your window's 3 years at the most in the modern NFL. What are you worried about?
Yeah.
So my question to you as a former GM is, when you do have a proven commodity, and we'll use some of the Rams, whether it was, you mentioned Matthew Stafford, you can go to Von Miller, you can even go back to Jalen Ramsey, versus the uncertainty of a first-round pick.
Yeah,
we all know that's how you build your team. You got to hit on draft picks. But, man, why doesn't more GMs in this league value demonstrable performance over the uncertainty of what's going to be analytically a 50-50 shot in the draft?
I think sometimes they get caught up in that they can make a difference with their draft picks. I think there's a little patting themselves on the back. And if we don't have a first round pick, what can I do? There's some of that. Sometimes it's cash. Sometimes it's money. The McVay deal and even the Wentz deal, those teams paid a lot of money to those players and then send them out of town a year or two later. That's an awkward conversation with your owner. The Rams paid Jared Goff a ton of money and then sent him packing not too long after that. So I think the old school thought is, once we decide we're going to pay this guy, we're going to stick with it forever. And sometimes you end up making two wrongs to try to get it right, and it doesn't happen. So I think there are a lot of, GMs that, aren't aggressive. They just don't want to go, and they're not confident. They don't want to go make a deal. The other thing is, sometimes within buildings, you have cap people or you have other agendas that talk you out of things. and that's part of their job. So I'm not, shedding shade on them. It's just part of their jobs. And sometimes the GM has to go out further on a limb. And a lot of them aren't willing to go out on limbs anymore, whether it's the money or whatever, but they've changed kind of their dynamic as well as to how they make decisions.
Randy, it sounds like you appreciate the way the Rams put this team together and were aggressive and got players who were already established. Can I read into that you like them to win the game next Sunday, or is it just you appreciate it and they'll take another shot again next year? What do you like in the Super Bowl?
I do. I like what they've done. I do think they are the better team right now. That's not to say that I don't love Joe Burrow. I know what Joe Burrow is, but I think the Rams are, I just think it's their day. I think they can do more things offensively than the teams that the Bengals have beaten so far. So, I think they'll be willing to run the ball if they have to. Now, if Cam Akers is out, that's a different story. I think that's a big injury to follow. He hasn't practiced much this week. So, but right now, and I reserve my right to change my mind, Jody, next week. But right now, I kind of like the Rams.
Yeah, even though he's an ex-executive, don't kid yourself. He's a good media guy that he knows how to cover his backside a little bit here. But I want to reserve the right to change my mind. I tried to put you on the spot. You did a good job dodging it, Randy.
No.
Good on you, my friend.
Thank you.
We appreciate you hopping on board with us. Thank you much. Enjoy the week. Enjoy the game, and we'll talk to you again down the road.
Thanks, guys. You too.
Thanks,
Randy Mueller from MuellerFootball.com. Does spots on Fox, his podcast, Life in the Front Office on The Athletic is one of the best football podcasts out there. Thought I could get him. He's good. Well, I reserve the right to change my mind, which he can do. It's 9 days away. I'm trying to put him on the spot early. I thought I could get him to make a pick. I'm not making a picker. I'm just going to say,
it's way too early. But I like that he went on. I'm on the same path. I think the Rams are the better team. But I got some time before I got to make that pick, Jody.
And I am going to reserve the right to change my mind. The only thing I'm saying today is I'm getting tired of losing to Joe Burrow. He keeps beating. Yeah, he keeps beating everybody. He's got something.
Sometimes, they're a team of fate, team of destiny, whatever you want to call it. And then he got the kicker as well, Evan McPherson, who he's not Justin Tucker, but he's as close to Justin Tucker as you can possibly get. And as a rookie kicker, talk about Evan Cool. We can call him that.
Burrow is looking pretty good with that victory cigar, and I think he wants to do one more. I'm not making my pick yet. If Randy Mueller doesn't have to make his, John McMullen doesn't have to make his, I'm not making mine either. But I'm acknowledging that Joe Burrow doesn't like losing, and he's been pretty damn odd this last month and change. All right, come back, put a bow on the show. Final segment of a Football Friday on Birds.